Did you know that there is a guide to achieving nirvana? Are you aware of how life after death was envisioned in ancient Tibet? And why was the Tibetan Book of the Dead read aloud to the deceased every day? In this video, you will learn why Buddhists might fear peaceful gods and identify themselves with wrathful gods. For whom and about what was the Tibetan Book of the Dead written, and how to choose a favorable rebirth? The history of the creation of Bardo Thodol, or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, according to legends, in the 8th or 9th century. It was the great teacher Padmasambhava. The thoughts of the great teacher were recorded by the Tibetan princess Yeshe, who was his wife and disciple. Padmasambhava moved to Tibet from India in the 8th century and became the founder of Buddhism in this country. It is believed that the great teacher repeatedly experienced posthumous experiences, remembered them, and described them in detail in the Book of the Dead. Later, the book was hidden in the hills of Gampo in central Tibet. Most likely, it was hidden due to the persecution of Buddhists in the 9th century in Tibet, to preserve it for future generations. In those times, many devout Buddhists hid manuscripts in caves, rocks, and crevices. But it is precisely because of them that many works have been preserved to our times. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was only discovered in the 14th century by the treasure seeker Karma Lingpa. It was kept for centuries in such an isolated place that after its discovery, it was called the Forbidden Kingdom. The first translation of the Bardo Thodol was carried out by Kazi Dalwas Samdup and published by Walter Evans Wentz in 1927. It was Evans Wentz who gave the Bardo Thodol its name. The name the Tibetan Book of the Dead was due to the once widespread popularity of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. In fact, Bardo Thodol translates to the Great Liberation through hearing in the Bardo. It received this name because it was customary to read this book to the deceased to help them find their way to nirvana. The book became a bestseller among the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism presented in the West. It contained unique information not found in other spiritual traditions. And this, despite the fact that Evans Wentz was not familiar with Tibetan Buddhism. Because of this, he introduced terminology into the editing that he borrowed from Judaism and his theosophical beliefs. The main purpose of the book. Contrary to its title, the Tibetan Book of the Dead was intended not only for the deceased. It emphasizes the importance of reading it frequently throughout one's life. This is necessary so that a person accurately remembers all the instructions provided in it. This book was also read to a dying person to prepare them for the upcoming trials. It was equally important to read this book to a person who had already died, in case they had not yet realized they were dead, or had forgotten the teachings of the book due to shock. The Bardo Thodol compiled prayers and instructions to aid the soul of a person after death. The book states that the soul experiences various transitional states. Bardo. And only the correct understanding of each of them helps the soul achieve enlightenment and rebirth. Human life itself, according to Buddhists, is also Bardo. It is one of the stages of the soul's journey. Bardo can be called not only a book of death but also a book of life, since it is not based on death in the conventional sense, but a concept of death that is fundamentally different from the usual. The Tibetan Book of the Dead consists of 3 parts, each of which describes a specific stage of the transitional state in which the soul finds itself after death. The entire period of the transitional state can last approximately 49 days. But each new day in the transitional state increasingly separates a person from rebirth in a world higher than the human one. The first part of the book describes the psychic phenomena at the moment of death, and the second part immediately after death, and in the third, the phenomena that appear before rebirth in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It is noted that most people simply pass through the Bardo and are reborn again and again. But those few who practiced meditation and gained wisdom will be able to linger in the Bardo and attain peace of mind. The book provides recommendations for each stage experienced by the soul after death. And its main goals are to allow the living to understand exactly when the moment of death has occurred and how to act immediately afterward. Extract consciousness from the human body so that it can adequately perceive the spiritual world. Explain to the dying person what they need to pay attention to, how to think correctly, and perceive what is happening. The first part, Shigai Bardo. The moment of death in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is considered the first step in the soul's journey. It is called Shikai Bardo. The beginning of this stage is the death of the physical body and the separation of the soul from it. It is extremely important for a person on their deathbed to remain conscious for as long as possible, because it is the person's last thoughts that determine their sensations after death and subsequent reincarnation. The first main experience of bardo is the experience of a state of uncertainty. At this moment, the person does not fully realize whether they are truly dying or will continue to live. This sensation, according to the Book of the Dead, does not arise on the physical plane. Rather, it is from the perspective of entering an illusory world from the real one. In Bardo Thodol, it is described that after death, human senses become heightened. According to the book, the deceased person sees a bright, clear light, which can evoke different feelings. Depending on the person's spiritual development, this can be a feeling of terror or peaceful sensations. In addition, when a person's soul transitions to the spiritual world, they may experience confusion and disorientation. That is why it is important to read the Book of the Dead to the deceased immediately after the soul separates from the body. This book will serve as a guide for them on how to behave. It is crucial to prevent the deceased from being frightened by the light they see, otherwise they will be drawn by their emotions to terrifying places. All people, without exception, are given the opportunity to see the clear light. If a person is enlightened, at this stage they can immediately break the cycle of rebirth and exit samsara. Such a person will transition to another world, a higher reality. But according to the book, only a few achieve such a level of enlightenment. If a person is not sufficiently enlightened, they will see the secondary clear light and remain in this state until the second stage occurs. But the book also mentions that if a person is not familiar with Bardo Head at all, then they may acquire a temporary illusory body and fail to find the path to the light. In the first minutes after death, a person may not even realize that they have died. They may see and hear everything happening around their body and try to make contact with it, or go to dear and memorable places one last time. The Book of the Dead states that such a person should strive for nothing other than the light. But even the light must be chosen correctly, the brightest one, because, according to the book, any other light leads to other worlds, where, once entered, a person will never reach nirvana. Throughout the first stage, any mourning is forbidden in the home of the deceased. For the soul to completely separate from the body, a Tibetan funeral rite must be performed. For this, the Lama covers the face of the deceased with a white cloth for 3 to 4 days. This time is necessary for the soul to leave the body and for all life processes to completely stop. No one is allowed to touch the body of the deceased until the soul has completely separated from it. In the room where the body remains, all windows and doors are closed. Only the Lama or Guru stays with the deceased, who must read the book and special prayers to the deceased. At the end of the first phase, the body of the deceased is handed over for burial and replaced with an image of the deceased. It is usually made of wood and dressed in the clothes of the deceased. At the end of the first stage, the image of the deceased is first decorated and then dismantled. This way, the deceased is made to understand that there is no need to visit the body anymore. The first stage lasts from several hours to 4 days. The second part. Konid Bardo. If a person fails to break the cycle of rebirths in the first stage and exit samsara, they enter the second stage. It is called Konid Bardo. During this period, wrathful and peaceful deities appear before the deceased. The person's spirit experiences something akin to awakening. He is overwhelmed by karmic visions related to his memories of human life. Here, the deceased will be beset by fears that will try to take over his soul or battle with it. If a person is not sufficiently enlightened, they may fall under the illusion that they have a physical body again, and then remain captive to the terrifying and peaceful visions of his human life. The book states that the vision depends on how many positive and negative feelings a person has accumulated over their lifetime. They also depend on how spiritual the deceased person was and how strong their faith was. During this period, a person must remain dispassionate and accept that both the terrifying and peaceful visions are merely embodiments of their life and will not harm them. At this stage, according to the book, any thought of the deceased will manifest as a vision. When the deceased realizes that they are under the power of visions, they will once again have the chance to leave the wheel of eternal rebirth and move to a more elevated world. But if they do not realize this, they will remain under the power of visions until the peaceful illusions completely disappear. You might wonder why the deceased could be frightened by peaceful deities? The answer is simple. Peaceful deities carry so much light that it terrifies the deceased and makes them run away from such a deity. With the light comes a thunderous noise, which can frighten the deceased who has not realized their death. Even more. Thus, it turns out that even from a peaceful deity, the deceased may try to distance themselves. The deceased's last chance to realize that they are under the power of illusions will be the moment when only monsters remain around them. If even at this moment the deceased cannot realize that this is a play of their imagination, they will move on to the next stage. However, if they manage to experience a sense of unity with the deity representing state of mind, the cycle of rebirths will end. The duration of the second stage depends solely on how soon the soul frees itself from its own illusions. But during the 7 days, peaceful deities appear to the deceased, and for another 7 days, wrathful ones. The book states that some enlightened individuals bypass this stage and proceed directly to rebirth. The third part of Sitpa Bardo. If a person has not managed to free themselves from rebirth earlier, they proceed to the third stage. It is called Sitpa Bardo, or Bardo of the striving for rebirth. According to the book, this is where all people end up who have not reached a certain level of enlightenment, or have not engaged in spiritual practices. At this stage, a person who previously did not realize their death will seemingly awaken and understand that they have died. Then, depending on their karma, the person will spend some time in Sitpa Bardo. People with bad karma will suffer at this stage. They will be pursued by monsters, nightmares, terrifying screams, demons, and natural disasters. People who have lived their allotted time virtuously will enjoy blessings, and those with neutral karma will encounter a colorless monotony. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, people who find themselves in Sitpa Bardo are granted many karmic abilities. They can appear and disappear at will, their appearance as beautiful as in dreams. But if you look closely, you can see that their bodies shimmer with lights instead of flesh. Also, the bodies of the deceased are endowed with the ability to pass through solid objects. But the book warns that one should not become attached to these abilities. The book states that the deceased may have visions of their future life, with whom and how they will live it. But one should not follow these visions, otherwise rebirth and new sufferings are inevitable. A person who reaches this stage may try to return to their deceased body, but they will not be able to do so. At this moment, their body has already been committed, buried, or cremated. But due to excessive attachment to their past life, the deceased may become stuck in endless attempts to reclaim the past. If the deceased manages to distract themselves from their joys and sorrows, if they can focus, they may still be able to avoid the cycle of reincarnations. For this, the Bardo Thodol advises the person to pray to the gods and ask for their help, to focus and meditate in order to prevent rebirth. But if the person fails to understand that everything around them is once again just a play of their imagination and a reflection of their own life, they will face judgment. 2 spirits, one good and one evil, appear beside the person. Each of them, in turn, begins to stack white and black stones, with each stone corresponding to a good or bad deed. In this way, a wall gradually rises in a circle around the deceased, and it is impossible to escape from this circle. At this moment, the person may become frightened and start to claim that they did not commit so many bad deeds. Then a judge will appear, the Prince of Death with the Mirror of Fate. In the Mirror of Fate, the judge will see all the good and bad deeds of the person, and if it turns out that the person lied, the judge will sentence them to eternal torment. Here, the Book of the Dead reiterates that all trials are an illusion. In reality, after death, a person can no longer be harmed, and how long the torment lasts depends solely on the person themselves. If they can understand this, the torment will cease immediately, and the person will be safe. However, rebirth is unavoidable, and the only influence one can have is on who exactly they will be reborn as. The book states that at this stage, it is important for a person to maintain kind feelings and not succumb to anger. If they give in to negative feelings, they may be reborn in hell or become a wandering unholy spirit. If the deceased cannot realize that all their torments are merely an illusion, the torture will continue until the person forgets their own name and is reborn without memories of their past life. Nirvana or rebirth. 4. Northern Buddhists, nirvana was the goal of every rebirth. They wished to achieve it as soon as possible to exit samsara and end their suffering during constant rebirths. Therefore, finding the path to nirvana was considered the highest blessing for them, whereas rebirth was a true nightmare. The most enlightened once found the path to nirvana, the supreme reality, even at the first stage. There was an opportunity to open nirvana at the second stage as well, to free oneself from eternal rebirth and exit the cycle of rebirth. But what awaited those who did not exit the wheel of samsara and were destined for rebirth? Before them appeared 6 doors to different worlds, seen as 6 lights of various colors. White light, the world of deities. Green, the world of warring giants. Yellow, the world of humans. Blue, the world of animals. Red, the world of wandering unhappy spirits. Gray, hell. The deceased could easily determine which of the worlds awaited them. Eventually, they would enter the world that shone brighter than the others. According to the Book of the Dead, most often a person is reborn as a human or an animal. But if they were destined to be reborn in hell or as a wandering spirit, which was considered a bad fate, it could be corrected. To do this, the person needed to focus on exclusively positive emotions, associating the light of the undesired world for rebirth with the divine and bright world. Then the deceased would have the opportunity to be born into a better world than the one they were destined for. But also, if a person greeted the opportunity to enter a better world without joy, they could be reborn in hell or a world of unhappy spirits. Every emotion after death played a huge role. The book could not tell anything about the world of deities and warring giants. According to the book, few returned to rebirth from those worlds, and few ended up there after rebirth. Such occurrences were as rare as the ascension of the deceased to nirvana at the first stage of the soul's journey. In addition, rebirth could be postponed. The book provides for this in case a person is facing a difficult rebirth. According to the book, before the next incarnation, it would be as if the person is carried by a stream. If this stream turns out to be viscous and heavy, causing pain, then the rebirth will be the same. In such a case, the book advises that the person should gently and without malice resist the stream to prevent such a rebirth. If the stream carrying the person is like a pleasant dream, it indicates that a happy life awaits the person. Conclusion. We have reached the concluding moment of our journey through the pages of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I hope today you have discovered something new and important. May the knowledge gained from these ancient lines help you find peace and understanding in your own journey. Thank you for watching until the end. Until we meet again.